Stories, Granny Rose. My son Drew cried out in horror as my daughter-in-law Cheryl stood still with her arm still extended after throwing the glass of wine in my face. "You worthless old hag. When I ask you for more wine, you obey," she screamed, stumbling drunk in my dining room. At that moment, something inside me snapped. As a retired judge, I knew the law well, and I knew exactly how to use it to show her who was really calling the shots in this house. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this vid from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. The dinner had started off quietly. It was just another Friday night dinner I usually prepared since my son Drew and Cheryl moved into my house 6 months ago. The story was always the same. They were saving up to buy their own place. They just needed some time. 6 months later, they were still here. I prepared a prime rib roast that took hours in the oven. The table was set with my best china. The crystal glasses I inherited from my grandmother shimmered under the light of the chandelier. For me, these small formalities mattered. After 30 years as a criminal judge, routine and order were what kept me anchored. Cheryl arrived already agitated. She walked in the front door at 7:30 p.m., tossed her purse onto the sofa, and went straight to the bar in the corner of the living room. She poured herself a heavy amount of red wine while complaining about work. "That idiot of a boss thinks he can keep pressing me," she said. "He made me redo the entire report because, according to him, critical details were missing." She emptied the glass in 3 big gulps and filled another before even sitting down at the table. Drew shot me an apologetic look as he helped carry the plates to the table. My son had always been like that, trying to please everyone, avoiding confrontations at any cost. During dinner, I tried to maintain a civilized conversation, asking about Drew's job at the vet clinic, commenting on the new book I was reading. Anything to dilute the growing tension Cheryl carried with her. But every time we spoke, Cheryl interrupted with some cynical comment or rolled her eyes like a moody teenager and not a 32-year-old woman. And with every interruption, she drank more wine. By the 3rd bottle, I decided that enough was enough. When Cheryl held out the empty glass in my direction, as if I were a waitress waiting to serve her, I simply said, "I think you've had enough for today, Cheryl." She froze, the glass still raised in the air, her eyes fixed on me as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. "What?" I said, "You've had enough. This is my house, and I will not allow you to get drunk this way at my table." It was like lighting a fuse. Her face turned red, not just from the wine, but from a sudden fury that seemed to have been there, bubbling under the surface for months. "Your house," she laughed, a bitter sound that cut the air. "Just because we gotta live in this old museum with you doesn't mean you can treat us like children." Drew touched her arm. "Cheryl, please." Cheryl pulled his hand away. "No, Drew, I'm tired of this. Your mother looks at us as if we were intruders, as if we weren't worthy to walk on her precious hardwood floor." She turned to me. "Do you know what your problem is? You can't accept that you're no longer the powerful Judge Eliza Reynolds. Now you're just a lonely, retired old woman who needs to control everything and everyone around her to feel important." I remained calm. Years in the courtroom taught me not to show a reaction when provoked. "If that's how you feel, maybe it's time for you to find somewhere else to live." "Mom!" Drew exclaimed, horrified. Cheryl smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Servants shouldn't talk like that to their superiors. She held out the glass again. "Now, more wine." No. That was all I needed to say. In a movement too fast for me to react, Cheryl threw the glass directly at my face. The glass hit my right temple and shattered. I felt the sharp pain of the impact, then the warm heat of the blood running down the side of my face. My son screamed. Cheryl stood there breathing heavily, almost surprised by her own action, but showing no remorse. I brought my hand to my temple and looked at my fingers, now stained red. The silence in the room was deafening. 30 years sending criminals to the penitentiary, and now I was bleeding at my own dining room table. "Drew," I said with a calm that I did not feel. "Take your wife to her room now." Drew rushed to pull Cheryl, who still seemed stunned by what she had done. I heard their steps going up the stairs, the room door slamming shut. I went to the bathroom and examined the cut in the mirror. It wasn't deep, but it would bleed a lot, as head wounds often do. As I cleaned the wound with cold water, my thoughts organized themselves like a prosecutor preparing a case. I documented everything with my cell phone. I photographed the cut, the blood stain on my white blouse, the shards of glass on the dining room floor. I collected every fragment and put it in a plastic bag. Evidence. 30 years in the justice system taught me that evidence is everything. That night I couldn't sleep. Sitting in my home office with an ice pack against my temple, I began to outline my plan. Not for revenge. Revenge is emotional, impulsive. What I needed was justice. I needed to protect my son and my house. At 6 minutes past midnight, with the wound already forming a purplish-blue bruise, I picked up the phone. Miami Police Department. How can I help you? I want to report a case of assault. The officer arrived at 7:30 a.m. As the morning sun began to enter through the curtain cracks, Cheryl and Drew were still sleeping, exhausted after the explosion of the night before. I opened the door, and the police officer, a middle-aged man with gray hair at his temples, introduced himself. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Officer Jones. I received a call about an assault." I invited him in and took him to the dining room where the pieces of glass were still preserved in a corner marked with small numbered labels that I prepared during my sleepless hours. "It was here where it happened," I explained, keeping my voice low so as not to wake the two upstairs. "My daughter-in-law threw this glass at my face when I refused to serve her more wine. She had already had too much to drink." I showed him the photos on my cell phone, the cut on my temple, the blood on the blouse. The officer wrote everything down with a professional, non-judgmental expression. "Is the aggressor still in the residence?" "Yes, sleeping upstairs with my son." "Do you wish to file a formal complaint?" I hesitated only for a second, thinking of Drew, but then I remembered Cheryl's look as she threw the glass. That certainty that she could assault me in my own house and get away with it. "Yes, officer. I want to file a formal complaint." We sat at the kitchen table while he filled out the police report. Full name of the aggressor, our relationship, detailed description of what happened. I provided the information in the same tone I used to dictate sentences, clear, precise, with no visible emotion. We were finishing when I heard steps on the stairs. Drew appeared in the kitchen doorway, his eyes swollen with sleep, and the confusion transformed into horror at the sight of the police officer. "Mom, what's going on?" Before I could answer, Cheryl appeared behind him, also confused, but her face quickly changed to anger when she saw my injured temple and the policeman sitting at the table. "What the heck is this?" she demanded. The officer stood up. "Mrs. Cheryl Miller, I am here to investigate an assault complaint that occurred at this residence last night." Drew looked at me incredulous. "You called the police against Cheryl?" "She assaulted me, Drew. She threw a glass at my face and cut me." I kept my voice firm, without remorse. "It was an accident. She was drunk," Drew protested, desperate. "Being intoxicated is not a valid defense for physical assault, sir," the officer commented, his tone professional but firm. Cheryl stepped forward, her fists clenched. "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous. It was a family argument." "A family argument that resulted in physical injury," I replied calmly, "and in my own home." The officer addressed Cheryl. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to accompany me to the police station to make a statement." "What?" she yelled. "You're going to arrest me over a broken glass?" "At this moment, I am only requesting that you provide a statement. Depending on the facts confirmed, you could be charged with battery." Drew was crying now, alternating looks of pleading between me and the officer. "Please, Mom, don't do this. We can resolve this in the family." I looked at my son, feeling a pang of pain that had nothing to do with the cut on my temple. "Drew, we already tried to resolve this in the family for 6 months. Last night, Cheryl crossed a line. The officer asked Cheryl to get dressed properly to accompany him. She stomped up the stairs, Drew right behind her, imploring her to calm down. I was left alone with the officer for a few minutes. He looked at me with an expression I recognized. The kind of look veteran police officers give when trying to understand the family dynamic behind an incident. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to go through with this? Family issues can sometimes—" "Officer," I interrupted politely. "I worked 30 years as a criminal judge. I know exactly what I am doing and what the legal consequences will be." He seemed surprised. Then he nodded with a new respect in his gaze. Cheryl came downstairs, now dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Drew followed her, still crying silently. "This isn't going to end here," Cheryl said as she passed me. "You're going to regret doing this." The officer warned her not to make threats, which only increased her fury. As he led her outside, Drew turned to me, his eyes red from crying. "How could you do this? She's my wife." "And I'm your mother," I answered simply. "And this is my house." The front door closed and silence reigned in the house again. Drew stared at me for a few seconds, as if he didn't recognize me before running up the stairs. I heard the bedroom door slam shut. I sat in the living room armchair, suddenly exhausted. The bruise was throbbing, but the physical pain was almost a relief compared to the pain of seeing Drew's face. Still, I had no regrets. Years in the courtroom taught me that justice doesn't always seem fair at the moment it's applied. 2 hours later, Drew came downstairs with a backpack. His face was determined, but his eyes were still swollen. "I'm going to pick up Cheryl at the police station, and we'll stay at Trisha's place until we decide what to do." Trisha was a friend of theirs who lived in a tiny apartment downtown. It wasn't a permanent solution, and we both knew it. "Drew," I began, trying to keep my voice soft, "you don't have to leave. This is your home, too." He laughed, a hollow sound. "This house stopped being mine the moment you decided to call the cops on my wife. She assaulted me, Drew, at my own dining room table. She was drunk and lost her temper. People make mistakes, and people need to answer for their mistakes," I replied, my voice now firmer. "Especially when those mistakes involve physical violence." Drew shook his head. "It's always been like this. The inflexible judge, the law above everything, even your own son." That hurt more than the cut on my temple, but I didn't let it show. "It's because I love you that I'm doing this, Drew. Cheryl is abusive, and you're trapped in that relationship. Don't you dare analyze my marriage. You've always hated Cheryl. You've always believed I deserved better. And you do deserve it," I said calmly. "You deserve someone who respects you, and who respects your family." Drew took the car keys from the coffee table. "I'm going to get my wife. Then we'll come back to pick up the rest of the things." When the door closed behind him, I let out a long, tired sigh. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I valued so much. It was a heavy silence, loaded with consequences. I spent the rest of the day in a state of numbness, alternating between doubt and certainty. Had I done the right thing? Had I lost my son forever? The questions spun in my mind as I tried to read, tried to eat, tried to distract myself. At night, the phone rang. It was Drew. "Mom." His voice sounded cold, distant. "We're at Trisha's place. Cheryl was released with a summons to appear at a hearing next week. We'll stop by tomorrow to pick up our things." "Drew, you don't have to. I've already made my decision, Mom. I choose to stand by my wife." After he hung up, I sat down at my office desk and opened a new folder on the computer. I named it Case Cheryl. Inside, I created documents to record every stage of the process, every decision made, every piece of evidence collected. For 3 decades, I built cases against criminals of all kinds. Now I was building a case to save my son from a toxic marriage, even if for the moment he hated me for it. The next morning, while waiting for Drew and Cheryl to arrive to pick up their things, I called an old friend. Rick and I worked together for years, he as a detective and I as a judge. He retired before I did. Now he ran a small private investigation agency. "Ellie, how long has it been?" His deep voice brought me instant comfort. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need your help, Rick. It's a delicate matter." I explained the situation, the assault, the police report, the break with Drew. "I need to know more about Cheryl. I have a bad feeling about her finances, about how they're really living." Rick didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Send me her details. I'll look into it discreetly." An hour later, I parked my car 2 blocks from the house and waited. I didn't want to be present when they came to retrieve their belongings. Direct confrontation would only make things worse right now. From my vantage point, I saw Drew's car arrive. He and Cheryl entered the house using the key Drew still possessed. I watched the house for almost 2 hours, occasionally seeing one of them at the window, carrying boxes, moving quickly. When they finally left, the car was visibly loaded. Drew looked at the house one last time before getting into the vehicle. Even at the distance, I could see he was crying. Cheryl, on the other hand, seemed irritated, gesticulating as she said something I couldn't hear. I waited 20 minutes more before returning home. Their absence was almost physical empty spaces where objects had been, silences where conversations had been. The guest room they had occupied was partially empty. They left the furniture behind, obviously, but all personal items were gone. In the closet, I noticed one of my pieces of jewelry was missing a gold brooch that belonged to my mother. Drew knew how much I valued it. Was it an oversight or a small act of revenge? I preferred to believe the former. The following days were filled with an oppressive silence. Drew didn't call me. He didn't answer my texts. I tried to respect his space, but each day without news was a small torture. On Wednesday, I received Rick's first report. Sitting in my office, I opened the email attachment with apprehension. The discoveries were worse than I imagined. Cheryl had been fired from her job 3 months earlier. She wasn't simply having problems with the boss, as she claimed at dinners. She was unemployed, hiding it from everyone, even Drew. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. Cheryl had 5 credit cards, all maxed out, totaling a debt of almost $800,000. Worse still, 2 of those cards were in Drew's name, likely opened with a power of attorney or using his data without his knowledge. The report also showed something that genuinely alarmed me. 3 significant withdrawals from Drew's 401(d) retirement account in the last 2 months, amounting to $400,000. To make those withdrawals, Cheryl would need to have access to Drew's passwords or have forged his signature. There was more: small complaints at stores for bounced checks, an eviction notice from a previous apartment that they never mentioned, and most worrying, conversations captured on social media where Cheryl talked with friends about inheriting a house soon, when the old lady bites the dust. The old lady, me. I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just a case of explosive temper or a disrespectful daughter-in-law, it was a systematic scheme. Cheryl was financially drowning my son while planning a future built on my death. I printed the entire report and put it in a secure folder. I needed more. I needed to understand the full extent of the situation before confronting Drew with these discoveries. I called Rick again. I need you to keep investigating, especially the withdrawals from the retirement account. If you get concrete evidence that Cheryl acted without Drew's authorization, we could be talking about financial crimes. I'm on it, Rick replied. And Ellie, be careful. If this woman is financially desperate and believes she can inherit something from you, well, he didn't need to finish the sentence. 30 years in the criminal system taught me that money is one of the most powerful motivators for desperate acts. That night I changed the locks on the house, a necessary precaution. The following week brought the preliminary hearing on the assault. I attended the courthouse where I worked for decades, this time as a victim. It was strange to sit on the other side, to see former colleagues greet me with expressions of concern, to hear whispers in the corridors. Cheryl arrived with her lawyer, a young guy in a poorly fitting suit who looked like he was fresh out of law school. Drew wasn't with her, which surprised me. I expected my son to be there to support his wife. The judge was Sarah Jennings, a competent woman I knew superficially during my last years before retirement. She recognized me immediately, nodding discreetly in my direction. The procedure was brief and direct. The prosecutor presented the accusations of misdemeanor battery. Cheryl's lawyer argued that it was an isolated incident caused by stress and alcohol consumption, with no intention to cause harm. Your Honor, he said, my client has no criminal record and is deeply remorseful for what happened. We request that an alternative measure to jail be considered, such as community service. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up with the posture I maintained for decades in those same rooms. Your Honor, I do not seek revenge or severe punishment. I seek justice and primarily protection. The assault occurred in my own home, at my own table, by someone I sheltered out of kindness. I respectfully request that in addition to any punitive measure the court deems appropriate, a restraining order be issued, preventing the defendant from approaching my residence. I saw Cheryl's face turn pale. A restraining order would mean she couldn't return to my house, the house where she and Drew were living, the house she apparently hoped to inherit. The judge considered for a few moments before announcing her decision. In view of the nature of the incident and the relationship between the parties, I determined that the defendant shall complete 6 months of community service and mandatory participation in an anger management program. Additionally, I issue a temporary restraining order prohibiting the defendant from approaching within 100 yards of the victim's residence in person for a period of 90 days. after which the situation will be reevaluated. Cheryl's lawyer tried to protest, arguing that the restraining order was excessive given the family context, but the judge was firm. Domestic violence is no less serious for occurring among family members, sir. On the contrary. As I left the courtroom, I noticed Drew sitting on the back bench. Our eyes met briefly before he averted his gaze, quickly getting up to meet Cheryl in the hallway. I wanted to approach him, explain why I was doing all this, tell him that I had discovered worrying things, but the moment wasn't right. Drew wasn't ready to listen. I returned home and added the hearing transcript and a copy of the restraining order to my Case Cheryl folder. The folder was getting thicker, both literally and metaphorically. 2 days later, I received an unexpected call. It was Drew. Mom. His voice sounded exhausted, almost unrecognizable. We need to talk. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop far from both my house and the friend's apartment where they were staying. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner where we could have some privacy. Drew walked in punctually. He was thinner, with deep dark circles he couldn't completely hide. He was wearing a turtleneck sweater despite the warmth of the day, something that immediately activated my internal alarms. "Are you okay?" I asked as soon as he sat down. "I'm dealing with the situation," he replied, avoiding my gaze as he picked up the menu. We ordered coffee black for me, with milk for him, as always. When the waitress left, we stayed in an awkward silence, neither of us knowing exactly how to start. "The restraining order complicated things," he finally said. "We've been at Trisha's place for almost 2 weeks. The sofa is killin' my back, and her patience is running out. Can you rent a place?" I suggested, keeping my voice neutral, non-accusatory. Drew let out a bitter laugh. "With what money? My salary barely covers our basic bills. And Cheryl," he hesitated, looking at his own hands. "Cheryl hasn't found a new job yet, so he still believed that lie." I took a sip of coffee, pondering how to proceed. Confronting him directly with everything I discovered could make him completely shut down. "Drew, if you're having financial difficulties, I can help you." "Just you?" He finally looked at me directly. "What does that mean? Just you? It means I worry about you, and I want to ensure you're okay, but I have conditions for that help." "What conditions?" His voice tightened. "I want you to review your bank accounts. All of them. Your savings, your retirement, your credit card statements." Drew frowned. "Why is that?" "Because I have reason to believe that you're unaware of your true financial situation." "What are you talking about?" Drew put the cup down on the table with excessive force, spilling some coffee. "If this is some attempt to turn me against Cheryl—" "It's not an attempt," I interrupted gently. "It's a request based on facts I discovered." "Drew, when was the last time you checked your 401k fund?" His expression changed subtly. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. "I don't know. A few months ago, maybe. I set everything up for automatic deposits. And the withdrawals? Did you authorize any withdrawals recently?" He went completely still. "What withdrawals?" I opened my purse and took out a sheet of paper, a statement from his retirement fund that Rick had obtained. I put it on the table, turned toward him. The document clearly showed 3 large withdrawals in the last 2 months. Drew took the paper with trembling hands, his face losing color as he read. This isn't possible. I never authorized this. There's more," I said gently. Taking other documents from my purse, credit card statements in his name with purchases he clearly hadn't made, including expensive jewelry and transfers to accounts we didn't recognize. Drew glanced through the papers. His breathing sped up more and more. "How did you get all this?" "I hired a private investigator. After Cheryl assaulted me, I realized something was very wrong." "You investigated my wife?" His voice went up an octave, indignant. "I investigated to protect you," I replied firmly, "and it seems I was right to worry." "Drew, Cheryl was fired 3 months ago. You have 5 credit cards maxed out, 2 of them in your name. She withdrew $400,000 from your retirement without your authorization. This is a crime." Drew closed his eyes, taking several deep breaths. When he opened them, there was a mix of emotions in his gaze: anger, confusion, fear, and finally a flash of recognition. "The bills. She always said she was paying the bills, but there was always money missing. I thought it was because my salary is low that we weren't managing well." She's stealing from you, son. Drew shook his head slowly. No, there must be an explanation. Maybe she was desperate after losing her job. Maybe she didn't want to worry me. She must have planned to pay the money back when she got a new job. Drew, I said, with all the gentleness I could muster, there's something else you need to see. I handed him the last document, 6 screenshots of Cheryl's conversations with friends, where she talked about inheriting a house soon, when the old lady bites the dust, and putting up with the old lady for a few more months until we resolve our financial situation. Drew read the messages once, twice, 3 times, as if he couldn't comprehend the words in front of him. Then I saw something in his face break. A tear rolled down his cheek, followed by another and another. She always said you didn't accept us because you were too traditional. That's why you treated us with such coldness. Drew, I never cared who you chose to love. I care about how that person treats you. He wiped the tears with a napkin. When we moved into your house, she said it would be temporary, just until we saved money for our own place. But something always came up. An unexpected bill. An emergency. She said we were saving, but I never saw the money grow. I held his hand across the table. And the sweater? It's too hot to wear a turtleneck. Drew paled and instinctively pulled the collar up higher. It's nothing. Is it her? Has she also been violent with you? His eyes filled with tears again. Slowly, he pulled the collar down, revealing finger marks on his neck, yellowish bruises that seemed to be fading. It was after the hearing, he whispered. She was furious about the restraining order. She said I should have testified in her favor, that I chose you over her. Drew looked down. I'm so scared, Mom. The anger I felt at that moment was different from the cold indignation I experienced when Cheryl threw the glass at me. It was a protective, primal fury, but I couldn't let it control me. Drew needed clarity, not more emotional chaos. I want you to come home with me today, I said firmly. Right now, Cheryl can't approach the house because of the restraining order. You'll be safe there. As for your things, we'll send someone to get them later. The important thing is to get you out of that situation immediately. She's going to go crazy when she finds out I left. That's exactly why you need to leave, Drew. This is a classic pattern of abuse. Drew remained silent for a long moment, looking at the documents scattered in front of us. Irrefutable proof of Cheryl's financial and emotional betrayal. Finally, he nodded slightly. Okay, let's go home. On the way back, Drew remained silent, looking out the window. Only when I parked in the garage did he speak again. How did I let this happen? How did I not realize? Abuse rarely starts out obvious, I replied, turning off the engine. It begins with small lies, small controls that gradually escalate. By the time you realize it, you're already caught in a web. We walked into the house that was always his too, the house where he grew up. Drew stopped in the middle of the living room, looking around as if seeing the place for the first time. I'm going to prepare your room, I said, going up the stairs. Drew's room was still as it always was. I preserved it when he left for college and kept it when he and Cheryl moved into the guest room. It was a refuge from the past, a place where he could feel safe again. I changed the sheets, opened the windows to let in fresh air, and put fresh flowers on the nightstand. Small gestures to tell him he was welcome, that this was his home. When I came down, I found Drew sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his cell phone. He looked up when I entered. She's called 12 times, sent 20 texts asking where I am. You don't need to answer now. I need to. If I don't answer, she'll show up here, restraining order or not. Drew typed a brief message. I need some time to think. I'm safe. Please don't look for me today. Seconds later, the phone began to ring. Cheryl's name flashed on the screen. Drew rejected the call with trembling hands and turned off the device. What do I do now? He asked, looking lost. One step at a time, I replied, sitting next to him. First, we need to protect your finances. Tomorrow we change your bank passwords and notify the bank about the unauthorized transactions. Then we see a lawyer to discuss your legal options. Legal options? He repeated as if tasting the words. You mean divorce? Among other things. What she did, the unauthorized withdrawals, the credit cards in your name are financial crimes. Drew, you can choose whether or not to file a complaint, but we need to stop her from continuing. Drew nodded slowly. I never thought I'd be in this situation. I always thought I'd recognize abuse if it happened to me. No one thinks it will happen to them. That's why abuse persists. It's disguised. It's justified. It makes the victim doubt themselves. That night, I prepared dinner while Drew took a long bath. We had a simple meal, silent most of the time, but it was a different silence from the one that had been between us in the previous weeks. It wasn't a silence of anger or resentment, but of reflection, of reconnection. Before going to sleep, Drew hugged me. The first hug in weeks. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he whispered. "I would never give up," I replied, holding him a little tighter. That night, lying in my bed, I heard Drew crying in the next room. The sound broke my heart, but it also brought me a strange relief. He was home. He was safe, and the crying was part of the cure. The next day, as we planned, we went to the bank. Drew canceled all the cards, changed passwords, blocked access. We initiated the process of disputing the unauthorized withdrawals from his retirement. The manager, seeing the documents and hearing the explanation, strongly suggested that Drew file a formal complaint for fraud. "We'll think about it." That was all he could manage to respond at the moment. In the afternoon, we met with an attorney specializing in family law and domestic abuse cases. Rebecca was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a firm presence, exactly the kind of person we needed. "Based on what you told me and the documents you brought, we have a solid case for divorce on the grounds of improper marital conduct," Rebecca explained. "The financial abuse is well documented, and with the evidence of physical abuse, we can request a permanent protective order, not just the temporary one that already exists." Drew took a deep breath. "What if I don't want her to go to jail?" "I understand your hesitation," Rebecca replied gently. "Many victims of domestic abuse have conflicting feelings about criminally prosecuting their abusers. We can initially focus on the divorce and protecting your assets. Criminal complaints can be a separate decision you make when you're ready." Leaving the office, Drew seemed simultaneously exhausted and relieved. "It feels like I'm waking up from a nightmare," he commented as we drove home. "It's a process," I replied. "It's not going to be solved overnight." "I know, but now at least I'm walking in the right direction." That night was interrupted by a noise at the front door around 10. Furious banging, the doorbell ringing repeatedly. Drew and I looked at each other on the sofa where we were watching a movie. "It's her," Drew whispered, fear evident in his voice. "She can't get in," I assured him, grabbing the phone. "And she's violating the restraining order. I'm calling the police." The banging continued, getting louder as I reported the situation to the 911 operator. "My daughter-in-law is violating a restraining order, trying to force her way into my house. We need a patrol car immediately." "Drew!" Cheryl's voice penetrated the door. "I know you're in there. Open this door right now." Drew shrank on the sofa, trembling. I went to him and held his hands. "It's okay. She can't get in. The police are on their way." Cheryl continued yelling, threatening, imploring alternately. The noise attracted the neighbors' attention. I saw lights turning on in nearby houses, faces appearing in the windows. When the patrol car arrived 7 minutes later, Cheryl was still on the porch, now kicking the door. The police found her in flagrant violation of the restraining order. We watched through the window as they arrested her. She continued looking at the house, screaming Drew's name, even as they put her in the patrol car. "What's going to happen to her now?" Drew asked, his voice almost inaudible. "She'll be arrested for violation of the restraining order," I replied. "This has serious consequences." That night, Drew slept in my room, as he did when he was little and had nightmares. But this time, the nightmare was outside being taken away. The next morning, I received a call from the detective in charge of the restraining order violation case. Cheryl would be kept in custody until the bail hearing scheduled for the following day. "Due to the recent history of violence and the clear demonstration of instability, it is likely that the judge will set strict conditions for provisional release," he explained. "This may include an electronic ankle monitor and constant supervision." I thanked him for the information and hung up, feeling a mix of relief and concern. Drew was still sleeping. The events of the night before had completely exhausted him. I prepared breakfast and left a note explaining where he could find me. I had a scheduled meeting with Rick, my investigator friend, to discuss the new discoveries. We met at his small office downtown. Rick looked worried when he greeted me. "Ellie, we discovered more things about Cheryl, things you need to see." He opened a folder and spread documents on the table. There were police records from 2 different cities, both involving Cheryl in cases of domestic violence and financial fraud. She's done this before, Rick explained. In Atlanta 5 years ago and in Dallas 3 years ago. In both cases, she got involved with people who were financially well off, moved into their houses, started manipulating their finances, and eventually became violent. And what happened in those cases? In the first one, the victim withdrew the complaints after Cheryl made promises to change. In the second, there was an out-of-court settlement. The victim paid a significant amount of money to get Cheryl out of his life. She's a serial predator, I murmured, glancing through the documents. And Drew was just her most recent victim. Exactly. And there's something else. Rick hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. We found evidence that Cheryl recently researched life insurance and inheritance, specifically how to guarantee inheritance rights through marriage. A shiver ran down my spine. The implications were clear and terrifying. Do you think she? I couldn't finish the sentence. I can't say for sure that she was planning something specific, Rick replied. But the pattern is worrying. She drained Drew's financial resources. She knew you have a valuable house and other assets. The searches about inheritance, combined with the comments about the old lady biting the dust, paint a disturbing picture. I left Rick's office with the folder of documents heavy in my hands and an even greater worry heavy in my chest. What started as a case of assault at my dining room table had transformed into something much more sinister. When I got home, Drew was in the kitchen preparing lunch. There was a new energy in him, still fragile but determined. "Where were you?" he asked, putting water on to boil. "Meeting with an investigator friend," I replied, placing the folder on the table. "Drew, we need to talk." He looked at the folder, then at me, and turned off the stove. "More bad news?" "Important information. Please sit down." I showed him the documents, carefully explaining Cheryl's patterns of behavior in previous relationships. Drew listened in silence, his face going through a series of emotions: shock, pain, rage, and finally resolve. "So, I wasn't special," he finally said. "I was simply convenient." "You were a target," I corrected softly. "But that doesn't diminish who you are. Predators like Cheryl are skilled at identifying good, trustworthy people and manipulating them." Drew ran his hand over his face, taking a deep breath. "What do we do now?" "We need to talk to the lawyer and the police. These new documents strengthen both the divorce case and the possible criminal proceedings." "And her bail hearing is tomorrow." "Yes. I don't have to attend, right? But I want to. I need to look her in the eyes, knowing the truth." The determination in Drew's voice surprised me. In just a few days, he had gone from a confused victim to a resolved survivor. That afternoon, Drew and I worked out a detailed plan. First, he filed a petition for a contested divorce citing financial and physical abuse, accompanied by all the documents we had collected. Then, we filed formal complaints for the financial crimes, unauthorized use of the retirement account, and fraudulent opening of credit cards. The attorney, Rebecca, accompanied us every step of the way, ensuring all documents were impeccable. "We want to create a case so solid that there's no room for escape," she explained. "The combination of the civil and criminal proceedings will create immense pressure." The next morning, we prepared for the bail hearing. Drew chose a sober outfit, black dress pants, and a white shirt, the kind of clothing he would wear for an important job interview. I opted for one of the suits I used to wear when I was still a judge, a subtle reminder to the court of who I was. The courthouse was relatively empty when we arrived, accompanied by Rebecca. We were directed to the courtroom, where we took discreet seats in the back. Drew held my hand tightly, his fingers cold despite the warmth of the day. When Cheryl was brought in wearing the orange jail uniform and handcuffs, Drew sharply inhaled. It was the first time he had seen her since the night of the trespass. Cheryl scanned the room, and her eyes fixed on us. For a moment, her expression softened when she saw Drew, but then she noticed our intertwined hands and her face contorted into rage. She said something to her lawyer, who looked in our direction and shook his head. The judge entered and the hearing began. The prosecutor presented the case: flagrant violation of a restraining order, recent history of violence, risk of witness intimidation. "Furthermore, Your Honor," he added, "we have information that the defendant has a history of similar behavior in other jurisdictions, having been involved in previous cases of domestic violence and fraud in Atlanta and Dallas." This was new information to Cheryl. She turned sharply toward her lawyer, visibly shocked. She didn't expect her past to catch up with her so quickly. The public defender tried to argue that Cheryl had ties to the community, posed no real risk, and could await trial out of custody. The judge listened to the arguments with an impassive expression before announcing her decision. Considering the seriousness of the violation, the defendant's history, and the evident risk to the victims, I determined that the defendant shall remain in custody until trial, with the possibility of review in 30 days upon presentation of an adequate supervision plan. Cheryl let out a sound of protest, quickly silenced by her lawyer. As the officers approached to take her back to detention, she turned and looked directly at Drew. "Please." Her voice sounded desperate. "Drew, don't let this happen. I love you. We can fix this." Drew didn't look away. He stood firm, looking directly into the eyes of the woman who had betrayed and abused him for months. He said nothing, just watched as Cheryl was led out of the courtroom. It was the closure he needed. Not a pardon, not a reconciliation, just the silent acknowledgement that that chapter was ending. In the hallway after the hearing ended, Drew finally released my hand and took a deep breath. "I thought it would be harder," he confessed, "seeing her like that, hearing her beg. But I could only think of everything we discovered. The other people, the lies, the inheritance searches." "You are very strong," I said, feeling immense pride for my son. "I don't feel strong," he replied honestly. "I feel stupid for having fallen for this, for not having seen the signs." "You're not stupid. You were manipulated by someone who turned manipulation into an art form." On the way back home, we stopped at a hardware store and bought paint. Drew had decided to repaint his room, a symbolic act of a new beginning. He chose a soft blue, almost sky blue, the color of the sky after the storm passes, as he described it. The following days brought an almost therapeutic routine. During the day, we dealt with the legal matters meetings with the lawyer, visits to the bank to resolve the financial issues, filling out forms for the criminal complaints. At night, we painted Drew's room, moved furniture, renewed the space that had been his in childhood and adolescence, and that would now be his refuge for healing. 2 weeks later, we received the news that the bank had accepted the dispute of the retirement withdrawals. The $400,000 would be returned to Drew's account, and the bank would cooperate with the criminal investigation against Cheryl. "It's a start," Drew commented when we received the news. "One step at a time, right?" "Exactly," I agreed. That afternoon, as we applied the last coat of paint to the ceiling of the room, Drew said something he had been holding back. "Do you know what's the hardest thing to accept? It's not the money. It's not the lies. Not even the violence. It's realizing that the last 2 years of my life were based on a farce. That the person I loved never really existed." I climbed down from the ladder and sat on the edge of the bed, protected by plastic tarps. "Grieving for what you thought you had is often much harder than grieving for what you actually lost." Drew nodded, climbing down from the ladder and sitting beside me. "How do I move forward after this? How do I trust anyone again?" "Slowly," I replied carefully, "with the support of people who truly love you, and remembering that what happened doesn't define who you are or what you deserve in life." He leaned his head on my shoulder, staining my old t-shirt with blue paint. I didn't mind in the slightest. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he murmured. "Even when I was angry at you, even when I chose the wrong side. That's what mothers do," I replied simply. "We wait for the moment when our children are ready to listen. Then we're there to help them rebuild." A month passed. Life took on a new normalcy. Drew had returned to his job at the vet clinic, now full-time. I had returned to my retired routines, reading in the morning, gardening in the afternoon, occasional dinners with friends. The criminal case against Cheryl progressed slowly, as is typical in the justice system. She remained in custody, having been denied a second request for provisional release when new evidence of her previous activities came to light. Drew had started therapy twice a week, working to understand what had made him vulnerable to abuse and how to build healthier relationships in the future. Some nights I heard him crying in his room, but the episodes were becoming less frequent, less intense. One Saturday afternoon, as we prepared lunch together, an activity that had become a comforting ritual, the phone rang. It was the attorney, Rebecca. "I have news," she said. "Cheryl's lawyer contacted me proposing a plea deal." Drew put the phone on speaker so I could also hear. "What kind of deal?" She pleads guilty to the financial crimes and the violation of the restraining order in exchange for a reduced sentence, 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She also agrees to a no-contest divorce, waiving any claim to your assets or your mother's future inheritance. Drew looked at me, his eyes seeking guidance. What do you think? It's your decision, Drew, but 2 years in prison plus 3 years of probation is a significant sentence. And most importantly, she would be legally admitting what she did. If we don't accept, Drew asked Rebecca, what happens? We go to trial. With the evidence we have, I believe we can get a harsher conviction, maybe 4 or 5 years in prison, but trials are unpredictable, and you would have to testify, reliving everything publicly. Drew took a deep breath. Can I think about it? Of course, Rebecca replied. They gave us a 3-day deadline to consider the proposal. After we hung up, Drew silently returned to chopping vegetables for the salad. I respected his silence, giving him space to process. I don't know if I want to see her in jail for 5 years, he finally said. Not out of revenge, but I also don't know if 2 years is enough to feel safe when she gets out. Supervised probation is not a game, I commented. She would have to report regularly. She couldn't approach you. She would have to participate in rehabilitation programs. Any violation would send her straight back to the Clink jail. Drew nodded, absorbing the information. And the divorce would be faster if she doesn't contest? Much faster and less emotionally exhausting for you. He continued chopping tomatoes in silence for a few more minutes. I'm going to think it over. I want to make the right decision for the right reasons. 2 days later, Drew asked me to accompany him to Rebecca's office. He had made his decision. I want to accept the plea deal, he announced as soon as we sat down. Not because it's easier, but because it's enough. 2 years in prison, 3 on probation, a clean divorce, and the legal recognition of her guilt. It's justice without being revenge. Rebecca smiled. I think that's a wise decision, Drew. I'll communicate it to the prosecutor and her lawyer immediately. The process was surprisingly fast after that. A week later, we appeared in court for the hearing where Cheryl would formally accept the plea deal. It was the first time Drew would see her since the bail hearing a month ago. Cheryl seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. The prison uniform hung loosely on her thinner body. Her once perfectly dyed hair now showed gray roots. When she saw us entering the courtroom, her eyes fixed on Drew with a disturbing intensity. The judge reviewed the terms of the agreement in detail before addressing the defendant. Mrs. Miller, do you understand that by pleading guilty, you're admitting to committing the crimes of financial fraud, battery, and violation of a court order? Yes, Your Honor, Cheryl replied, her voice rougher than I remembered. And are you doing so voluntarily, aware of the consequences? Yes. Very well. This court accepts your plea of guilty and sentences you to 2 years of incarceration followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The specific terms of the probation include an absolute prohibition of contact with the victims, mandatory participation in anger management programs, and alcohol dependency treatment in addition to financial restitution, as stipulated in the civil agreement. The judge banged the gavel, finalizing the sentence. As the officers approached to take her away, Cheryl turned toward us one last time. Drew, she called out, ignoring the guard's warnings. I'm sorry for everything. Drew did not respond. He only held her gaze for a few seconds before looking away. It was the closure he needed. Not a pardon, not a reconciliation, just the silent acknowledgement that that chapter was ending. In the hallway after the hearing ended, Drew finally released my hand and took a deep breath. I thought it would be harder, he confessed. You were very strong, I said, feeling immense pride for my son. I don't feel strong, he replied honestly. I feel stupid for having fallen for this, for not having seen the signs. You're not stupid. You were manipulated by someone who turned manipulation into an art form. On the way back home, we stopped at a hardware store and bought paint. Drew had decided to repaint his room, a symbolic act of a new beginning. He chose a soft blue, almost sky blue, the color of the sky after the storm passes, as he described it. The following days brought an almost therapeutic routine. During the day, we dealt with the legal matters meetings with the lawyer, visits to the bank to resolve the financial issues, filling out forms for the criminal complaints. At night, we painted Drew's room, moved furniture, renewed the space that had been his in childhood and adolescence, and that would now be his refuge for healing. 3 months after our first meeting, Drew received an invitation to speak at a state conference on domestic violence. He was nervous, questioning whether he was ready to share his story on such a public stage. "What if I'm not eloquent enough?" he asked, as we rehearsed his presentation in the living room. "What if I freeze in the middle and look like an amateur?" "Then you take a deep breath, take a sip of water, and continue," I replied. "Remember, you're not there to impress anyone with your perfect public speaking. You're there to share a truth that can help other people." On the day of the conference, I sat in the audience watching my son step onto the stage. He was wearing a simple but elegant blue suit, his hair tied back in a professional bun. He looked confident, centered. "My name is Andrew Miller," he began, "and today I'm going to share with you how a broken glass of wine saved my life." For 40 minutes, he kept the audience completely engaged, alternating between moments of raw vulnerability when describing his own abuse and precise analysis of how the system often fails to recognize and address financial abuse. He concluded with a call for more education, better laws, and greater awareness. The standing ovation he received when he finished lasted several minutes. As I watched, I felt tears in my eyes, not of sadness, but of a deep and overwhelming pride. My son had transformed his pain into purpose, his experience into wisdom. After the talk, as we prepared to leave, Drew was approached by an older woman, elegantly dressed, with a badge identifying her as a representative of a philanthropic foundation. "Mr. Miller, your presentation was extraordinary," the woman said. "I'm impressed with the work you and your organization are doing. I'd like to discuss the possibility of funding to expand Safe New Beginnings." Drew looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise and hope. I nodded encouragingly. "That would be wonderful," Drew replied. "We have so many ideas to reach more people, especially in rural areas where resources are scarce." They exchanged cards, agreeing to a meeting for the following week. As we walked toward the parking lot, Drew seemed to be floating with excitement. "Can you believe it?" he exclaimed. "Real funding to expand the project? We could create materials in different languages, develop an app for secure financial tracking, maybe even open a small dedicated office." "You deserve it, Drew," I replied. "You worked hard, and you're making a difference in the lives of so many people." He stopped suddenly in the middle of the parking lot and hugged me. A strong hug full of gratitude. "None of this would have been possible without you, Mom. Without your strength that night, without your persistence afterward, without your support throughout this entire process." I returned the hug, feeling the peculiar sensation that only mothers know. Pride and nostalgia simultaneously, seeing your child grow beyond what you could ever have imagined. You always had that strength inside you, Drew. You just needed to rediscover it. That night, as I drove back home alone, Drew had gone straight to his new apartment. I reflected on the events of the last year. The assault with the glass, the police report, the discovery of the financial crimes, Cheryl's arrest, Drew's gradual recovery, and now this promising new chapter. It was impossible not to think about how a moment of violence, terrible as it was, had triggered a series of events that brought not only justice, but also healing and purpose. The broken glass had shattered more than crystal that night. It had broken the power Cheryl had over Drew, the lies that had built their relationship, and the illusion that abuse only happens to other people. In its place, we had built something new and stronger, a renewed bond between mother and son, a shared purpose of transforming our own traumatic experience into hope for others. I parked in the garage, entered the house, and turned on the lights. The silence greeted me, no longer an oppressive silence of loneliness or the tense silence that preceded the assault that night, but a peaceful silence of a life that had weathered the storm and found serenity on the other side. I made a cup of tea and sat on the deck watching the starry sky. I remembered the words of Drew's therapist during one of the joint sessions we had. Sometimes we need to break completely to rebuild ourselves stronger. Like that crystal glass, our family had shattered momentarily, but what we built from the fragments was more resilient, more authentic, and infinitely more precious than what we had before. Now, if you liked this story, click to subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to become a member for access to exclusive videos that I don't post here.